Our reading tonight comes from Mark. The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching, and with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits, and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. This is why I have come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons.
There's a story of a woman named Maria from a non-English speaking background. In fact, let's just say for the sake of argument, she's in one of these caravans trying to make their way to the U.S. And by some miracle, she squeaks through. And let's say that she lives in the U.S. for 5 years. She practices a little English with her bilingual friends, but she loves people watching. So mostly she sits in parks and watches Americans and tries to learn the language. One of her American friends begins to notice that every time she's asked how she's doing, she inevitably, with a huge smile, replies, "Very, very busy," which seems strange, particularly given the fact that she's retired and doesn't work. She's always smiling, always upbeat, and seems to have no stress. So after prying to understand what's going on, her friend realizes Maria is simply copying what Americans say to each other. When asked how they're doing, she's simply trying to be polite and to fit in. In this text from the Gospel of Mark, the story that we just heard, Jesus is in a small town called Capernaum, and he's healing all these people. And the next day, the disciples go and look for him, and they find him alone, and he's praying. And I have to confess, I've been reading this text for a couple weeks, kind of getting ready for this. And I found this last week that I had to be honest with myself that I was very jealous of Jesus, that he was alone. And he had time to pray. And so they say, "Everyone's looking for you," which makes sense because he's been going around healing people. He's giving them hope. He's addressing their problems and their concerns and their aspirations and hopes and dreams. But he says to his crew, "No, let's go. On to the next villages so I can preach and heal there, because that's why I've come." And then he leaves with a whole village begging him to stay, with work that is unfinished, with healing that has gone incomplete. He leaves. He goes on to the next village. And probably like his disciples and like many of the people in the village, we might think, but there's an opportunity to do so much good. You could have helped so many people. Somebody should do something. But Jesus says, no. And he moves on. Jesus doesn't do everything. Thank you guys so much for coming. That's it. Point of clarity. This is a Christian church, and I know hopefully you're sitting. That's a spoiler if you had not figured that out. Or maybe you're like, I suspected that might be what's going on here. And for sure, I'll be the first to say, and we have these conversations all the time. We have what we might call a very interfaith posture. We acknowledge the truth and beauty and goodness and the gifts that we can receive from the world's religious traditions, the love and grace that are harbored in all the holy names of God. Absolutely, we just happen to think that that's a Christian conviction. That living like Jesus, taking seriously the message of Jesus, means that we have that posture and attitude towards the world's faiths. And yeah, sure, we're open to the LGBTQ community in every way, and not just open, but affirming. Full humanity, full rights, full dignity, marriage, ordination in the church as ministers, absolutely. We also just happen to think that that is Christian. The list goes on, and this is an awfully fun soapbox. We'll come back to it at some point, I'm sure. The point is, as a Christian church, we're trying to follow the message and the way of Jesus. We're trying to be formed in the way of Jesus, to which most people could probably go, okay, yeah, right, we're on board for that. We understand. That's why we're here. Jesus doesn't do everything. You can't do everything. We, this community, can't do everything. Jesus says the reason he doesn't do everything, in this case, he says he has to keep moving. The Gospel of Mark is the most stripped down of the Jesus stories in the Bible, but in the Gospel of Luke, it's like twice as long. We get a lot more detail. We actually start to get a picture of what this movement is about in the Jesus story. In Luke 9, it says Jesus set out resolutely for Jerusalem. Luke 13, he was teaching on his way to Jerusalem. In 17, he made his way to Jerusalem. Great. You guys are biblical scholars. You're starting to get it. In Luke 18, he tells his disciples they're headed to Jerusalem. Luke 19, he went on ahead, making his way to Jerusalem. On and on. Throughout the gospel, you start to get the sense he's headed to Jerusalem. And not that he's predestined, or he's like some robot and he has no choice and he just has to go there. In fact, he gets interrupted along the way, and this is where we get some of his best teaching, his responses to questions that come up. But he can't be everything to everybody. You can't be everything to everybody. And we, as a congregation, can't be everything to everybody. And it's not just that Jesus needs to be in a particular city, right? Like he has an appointment, or there's a press junket, or Hamilton has finally come to Jerusalem and he's got tickets. You get the sense from the way the story is written, he has this compass, this internal orientation. He knows where he has to go. He knows who he is. He knows what he has to do. He has the sense of path, the sense of direction in his life. And so Jesus is able to say no. He's able to leave work unfinished. He's able to walk away from crowds and spend time alone and pray because he is so clear about what his life is about. Do you have a hard time saying no? Sometimes you preach sermons and sometimes they preach you. So let's ask it this way, because this is a tough question. No one wants to admit it. What is it that you've said yes to? Do you know? Maybe the reason it's so hard to say no is you're not really sure what you said yes to. So everything sort of seems appealing. Because you can't really say no until you've said yes to something else. Do you even know what it is that you said yes to? And this is not me preaching. This is self-interrogating, because it depends on the day of the week, and it depends on the week of the month and the month of the year. Sometimes, yeah, I'm crystal clear, and other times I have no idea, right? I stand there, stare at the computer screen. I don't know. Do we know? Or, what's so true of me is each day a blur of yeses and nos that seem to sort of happen to you because of a calendar or a phone or a watch or someone else's priorities. Is this something we even believe we have agency over anymore, or are we just sort of fulfilling someone else's script and it happens to come through a calendar? And I think for me, this makes Jesus very relatable. They find him alone praying. He's been surrounded by this crowd with all these expectations of him. These people have all these really strong opinions about what he should do and how he should do it and for whom he should do it and when he should do it. So he retreats, he withdraws to check himself, to make sure that all of these voices, probably with really great things they expect of him, haven't pulled him off track. One of the things that I found fascinating, I didn't look through all the Gospels, I looked through Mark and Luke. I didn't find this anywhere, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think in the Gospels we ever find Jesus doing anything out of obligation. The one place that I found was in the story of turning wine to water, or water to wine. I can't remember which way it goes, where his mother tells him to do something, and he says, no, it's not my time yet. But then he goes on and does it anyway, because he's a good boy. We don't see Jesus doing things out of obligation. You don't hear him say, man, I guess I should do this because I'm supposed to, and how else will I keep everybody happy? It's actually the tension in the Gospels. He goes against the expectations of the crowd. He goes against the expectations of the religious establishment. He goes against the expectations of the political machine to stay true to the few things that he's pursuing. No matter what's going on around him, he's slowly making his way to Jerusalem. He's preaching. He's healing. He's doing his few things. He doesn't let what everybody else wants, even what everybody else needs, very real needs, direct his path. We don't find Jesus stressed and worried that he'll let people down, right? Or what are people going to think? Or how will I ever explain this to the committee? Right? We don't ever find Jesus in any of the Gospels. There is no red letter text where Jesus says, I'm just so busy. I'm just really up to my eyeballs, guys. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard says the saint is the person who can will the one thing. But do they believe the right things? No. Are they the right religion? No. They have the right creeds? No. The saint is the person who can will the one thing. He's talking about the kind of person who knows what their life is about, who knows their path, their compass, their orientation. We have, as a congregation, we have individually a life force, God-given energies. And if they aren't focused, if they aren't disciplined in very specific ways, we get pulled off track. And those energies get diffused into all sorts of different things. And they dissipate and they get spread too thin. One of my favorite lines in The Lord of the Rings, Bilbo says, it's like butter spread over too much bread. This has been that season around here. And it's not sustainable. It can't keep going that way. Because these God-given energies, this life force, they're not as strong, they're not as meaningful, they're not as effective as they could be if we willed the one thing or the few things that we found most important. Focusing our sacred energy, this divine life force, our corporate animation, ambition, the spirit, whatever you want to call it. Do we find ourselves on a regular basis saying, I'm just so busy. I've just got so much going on. We have, in this season, last couple years at Collective, we've found ourselves saying on a regular basis, we're just so busy, right? Jess said it when she got up tonight. You would think this were a holiday week, right? Thanksgiving's Thursday. We've got more shit going on this week than we ever have, like every day, multiple times a day. There's so much going on. Why? If you look at your calendar, if you look at Collective's calendar and ask the question why, I think the answer is this, and it's probably my fault. Being busy is a drug that a lot of people are addicted to. And the reason Collective feels a lot like this is probably because being busy is a drug that I am addicted to. Now, obviously, there are seasons in life, right? We're in this season as a congregation. Transition, chartering, property, vision series, new projects, physical work on the plaza, strategic work on the future. It's unending. And I could stop half the things I'm doing and I'd still have way too much to do. And personally, somebody gets sick, right? We talked about this tonight. Somebody gets cancer, someone's in the hospital, something having to do with school, stuff with a family, there's a crisis. There are seasons where it is busy. And I'm not saying that you can just expect that there will always be this sort of like equilibrium. Life gets busy. But we have to examine the rhythms of our lives. We have to examine our orientation, our path, the extent to which we know who we are, and we know what it is that we're doing in this world if we're ever going to will the one thing or the few things. How many of you have heard the phrase drowning in good? Right? This is one of those great, I don't know where these phrases come from. They really have started to piss me off. Because drowning in good is still drowning. In the same way that growing pains are still agonizingly painful. These are not helpful. They sort of like this backhanded, like, oh, it's not that bad. It's that bad. You're drowning. It doesn't matter what you're drowning in. Sometimes the enemy of the best, or the enemy of the best is not the worst, it's the good. We get so busy doing these good things that we have no energy left to will the one thing. I was packing up the kids the other day. We were heading to visit our friends in Sanford, and they always bring a ton of toys to play with their friend Moses. And Moses has a ton of toys. So it's like we get in there, and they unload their, and it's just, so half of our stuff gets left, and we bring half of Moses' stuff home. June has gotten smart. June's always been smart, but she's gotten smarter. And so she has a purse, right? This big pink purse with tons of pouches. She's also got a tote shopping bag. It's like a Macy's. This thing could carry like 5-gallon jugs, and it's just massive. And now she started also asking for a plastic grocery bag. So she's got all this. She's like a Sherpa, but she has everything. But poor Huck, his birthday was in August, so now he's got 50 Matchbox cars and all these stuffed animals. We ended up somehow with like 3 remote control race cars, monster truck toys, but this is his favorite guy. And it's huge. The toy is like this. This is Tyrannosaurus Trucks. He's a dino truck. So we're leaving the other day, and we're trying to get out the door, and June is already gone. She's out to the car. And I've sort of stepped out, and I've got the key, and I'm waiting for him to come out so I can lock it. And he's like in and out and back and forth. And he's like, I can tell he's processing something, but he can't verbalize it, and he's just back and forth. And then he stands in the doorway, and he's like looking out and looking back, looking out and back. And I'm starting to get, I'm raising my voice, we'll say. Come on, Huck, we gotta go. We're late. Come on, get moving. Get in the car. And I turn around, and he's standing there. He's not making any sound, but just tears. He's just crying. And I'm like, no, I'm not mad. Everything's fine. What's going on? What's wrong? I'm not mad. And he looks back inside at Tyrannosaurus Trucks, who's on the floor. And he says, I can't get my dino truck because my hands are full of toys. We can get busy doing so much, even so much good, that our hands are full. And they're probably full of really good things. And around our feet, there's all the things that we've dropped, intentionally or not. And some days we're just standing there crying, and we don't know. We don't know what to do. Because for all the great toys and for all the things that we dropped, whether we meant to or not, we still can't seem to grab the thing that we care about the most. We still can't seem to will the one thing. Part of the reason we've spent so much time in this vision series is because Collective is extraordinarily busy. We said this at the finance meeting. Dan and I were talking about this week. For a congregation our size, and we're on par. Our budget is on par for a congregation our size across the board. We're sort of plugging along the way we should. But for a congregation our size with the staff that we have, we're insanely active and busy compared to any other congregation with the size and budget and staff that we have. And I'm not complaining. Listen, and Caitlin's not complaining. Just that we do this for love. This is not obligation. This is passion. We do it because this is what we've given our energies to. And there comes a point at which we have to acknowledge that we can't do everything. We can't be everything to everyone. We would love to be, but we can't. And part of the way that we give ourselves to each other and we give our best to the world is to step away and to take time to reflect on rhythms, to discern in the midst of all the busy and good, these great things in which we might be drowning. We have to, from time to time, step back, get away and get quiet and ask the right questions and discern with clarity the handful of things that we're going to be about. And we've done this, and trust me, we heard the feedback loud and clear. Folks are ready for the Vision series to be over. We get it. We don't want to talk about it anymore. Let's just move on. And I want to say this, because initially, and I'll own this, initially that hurts me because I've invested so much in it. But at the same time, I get it, because I started thinking about the disciples. And they were probably less than thrilled with Jesus stepping away to be alone and to discern the things that he was going to give his life to. Because that's not sexy. And that doesn't whip up a crowd. It's counterintuitive and countercultural when this thing is as white hot as it was a year and a half or two ago to slow down. To say, you know what? this is going to get worse before it gets better unless we clarify who we are and what we're doing, unless we make a priority the difficult work of discernment. But it's worth it. And tonight we get to begin to show you the fruits of your labor, because this is a process you guys undertook. And we're going to share with you what you've said about who we are and where we're headed. I didn't know that guy was still up there. Sorry. And I do mean begin to share, because this is going to unfold. This is in process, and it will be in process. Especially over the course of the next 6 weeks, we're going to kind of reveal a little bit more, and actually you guys are going to be, throughout the season of Advent, involved in helping us figure out how to take sort of the general ideas of the vision and put some teeth to it. And this will go on to inform everything from the themes and the topics for all of the preaching and the services next year, to the ways that we shape community groups, to the events that we're going to schedule in 2019, to anything new that we start from this day forward, will be run through the filter of this vision. Is this a part of the few things that we've given ourselves to? And even if it's great, and even if half the people love it, if it's not one of the things that we have agreed, this is not some people sitting up here going, we're telling you where to go. This is you all. This is what we heard over weeks and weeks of taking feedback. So we're going to share a bit more. And then you guys are going to get to jump in and work with us on how we make this come to pass in the next few years. So we started out, this has been 8 or 9 weeks ago now, asking in different ways for several weeks in a row who we are at our best, our core values, our strengths. And we said we might think of these as our assets. These are the things that we have, both to make us best at who we are as a congregation, and then also turn to give away to the community. These are the things that we have to put to work, doing these few things that we ought to be doing. So, like Jesus might have found that he was a pretty good healer and a pretty decent preacher. Good. So he's going to go and do his thing, preach and heal, on his way to Jerusalem, because he has a sense for where he's going. And what you all said was, and this will be a recap, but it's worth it because I want you to have this in mind when you start to hear the vision stuff. You all said at our best, and this is highly consistent with the same values we find in our community statement. You said, in terms of collective at its best, our assets and our identity, at our best, collective is acceptance and inclusion, intelligent voices, relationships, empathy and care, hospitality, brunch, Eucharist, music, hugs and smiles. I love that made the top list. For the final presentation, hugs and smiles. You guys are killing it. Sermons and discussion, what we value most. Open hearts and minds, meditation and silence, diversity and inclusion, humor, awesome. Intellectual engagement, Eucharist, and music. So you're starting to pick up some themes that are shared across these. And then our strengths, care and support, non-judgmental environment, open minds, open hearts, community involvement, vulnerability, creativity, music, and events. And then we spent several weeks asking in different ways. Oh, here's the top overall. So this combines the ones that were in those three. I'm not going to say them again because we've heard them all, but the ones that doubled up and showed up for the entire series. And this is how it was depicted in, what's this called, a Wordle? Wordle. Sounds like a Pokemon, but okay. Just looking at that sort of makes me break out in hives. That seems busy. So, I'm not going to look at it anymore. Then, we spent a few weeks asking in different ways, what should we focus on? And as we listen to unheard voices, as we listen to community needs, as we listen specifically to spiritual needs that we might be uniquely capable of meeting as a spiritual community, and we listen to needs within this congregation, and then we took time to vet that list. And that's what we've been doing for the last several weeks, doing some research, making sure we weren't reinventing the wheel, we weren't going to try and start something that was already being done better. And we spent the time we needed to discern and put language on and craft not what we wanted, but what you all told us. And this sort of arose, I want to share these wise words. These came out of our leadership, and these sort of, I think, were developed in the course of this vision series to help frame and flesh out some of these assets. And so some of the things that showed up just as a word or a couple words, this helps put a frame on that. So Collective is a religious institution and spiritual movement which invites exploration of questions humans have traditionally turned to religion to answer. What are we doing here? What are we supposed to be doing? How does one live a, and it should say good life, but it's cut off. Collective is an inclusive community where our quest for answers to these questions can be explored and shared. Collective assumes the answers to these questions will inevitably prompt efforts to reduce the suffering of fellow humans and to ensure sustainability of our planet. When these efforts arise from a religious or spiritual leading, energy is created to support these efforts, and this energy is often contagious and often evolves into a corporate leading and energized congregational action. Efforts which build on the existing strengths, capabilities, and assets of the congregation yield the best results. That's a great summary for everything we've done in the Vision series. That's appreciative inquiry, is that we at our best should do what we do best in order to give our best to each other in the world. That's who we are. Creating an image of a more fair, just, and satisfying world is an accomplishment in and of itself and can go a long way towards creating that world. I think that's one of the reasons maybe we find ourselves in the Christian tradition, is because everyone that comes before Jesus, up through Jesus, the prophets, create a compelling vision of the world where there's peace and there's plenty and there's justice, there's goodness, there's harmony. That's compelling. That moves us. Collectives should support the leadings of congregants that evolve into corporate leadings and should not attempt to become a social service organization. So this was in response to early when we asked the questions, what should we be focused on? 80% of the feedback was somebody should do something about. And what we were looking for is this individual leading that becomes a corporate congregational leading, which is a person saying, I'm passionate about, and so I'm already doing XYZ. Does Collective want to come alongside and be a part of that? That's the Blue Lake thing, that's faith, that's many of the things we've gotten involved in are these personal connections in the room that become corporate leading. Collective should accept its role as the home of self-selected seekers and not attempt to be a church for everyone. So this didn't come through the vision thing, but we came across this phrase probably halfway through, which I think this summarizes perfectly. And I don't think this will ever show up formally anywhere because we'd be stealing it from someone, but it's a really apt tagline for who we are and what we do. Collective as a church for anyone, but not for everyone. So, ultimately, who we are as a congregation, internally, externally, what should we focus on in these next several years? What are the few things that we're going to give ourselves to? This is what you said. So I'm going to give you the vision statement first, and then we'll break down the handful of priorities. We share our unique expression of Christianity by cultivating community dialogue and curating inspiring content so that people experience unconditional belonging and practice transformative love. Seems a hell of a lot simpler than the time it's taken to come up with that, but that'll all make more sense in the coming weeks as we unpack that. I want you to keep in mind, we're going to get into that in much more detail next week on how we came up with this and what I'm about to share, and then how these all tie together with the vision statement, and we figure out how to make these real for us. So these are the top vision values, and so let me explain this. We sort of looked at the internal focus, what we need to be doing as a congregation to care for the internal life of the congregation, and then what is it that we need to be doing as a presence in our community. Those are reflected, the internal red and the external black. And after everything got taken in, we decided to add one more, which is liturgy, because so overwhelming amount of the responses that we got to so many different questions about what we ought to be doing and whether it's internal or external or blah, blah, blah. So many people said, keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing the stuff on Sunday night. Keep doing what you're doing. So what we want to do is sort of set as the ground of these new priorities and values, the liturgy, which is the way that we experience God together as the work of the people. This is what we do on Sunday nights. This is what we do at brunch, on and so forth. We'll get into that more next week. So this is an exciting one to start with because this was the one that was brand new. The other ones feel pretty natural for us. But deep belonging as our primary priority for what we will focus on internally in our congregational life has to do with the way that we commit to plant relational roots in what is already unconditional. And we'll get into this more, but the thumbnail sketch of this is we have built this congregation and become incredibly successful at what we call community groups and at public events. The only issue is that these are and one of our core values being people can self-select in, right? We're not putting pressure on people. There's no religious guilt. There's no obligation. The flip side of that is everything is self-selected and drop-in. And so part of what you all said over the course of the Vision series is it gets really tough over time to actually get prolonged exposure to the same group of people and really truly know someone and to be known by them. And so one of the things we're going to focus on in the next several years is creating groups, smaller groups, longer-term commitment, where you guys are spending time sharing life together over an extended period of time so that we actually know the people who are here in the room. And this has come up in several ways, but that's one of the major focuses that we're going to put our energy into. Youth and children, not surprising. This has been for a number of years a question mark because of the nature of what happens in this room and preachers who curse and things like that. The question was, how do we get from when we started, it was just childcare, and then we had childcare and collective kids, and now we've got collective student stuff as well. So it's re-upping on the commitment to be intentional about how we create a pathway for full engagement of people at all ages. This is the intergenerational thing. This is the work that Caitlin's already done really, really well. We're doubling down on focusing on this to make sure that if we say we're going to be intergenerational, we really have to work at making that happen. The great part about this is now we get to turn this back over to you all. And just, how are we going to do this? You know what our assets are. Tell us how we're going to make it happen. External focuses. This was actually interesting to me. The one that came up primary was community dialogue. And I think some of this goes back to the major events we've held with Peter Rollins, and we've brought in Brian McLaren. We've done big things in the community that have brought people into the life of this congregation because of the quality of voices that we've put on platforms and the fact that we've always leveraged those to engage a broader conversation in our community. And so what we heard is that people want us to double down on that and focus on doing that as an expression of who we are as a congregation. So hosting conversations that bring people together for listening and sharing. And finally, focused local activism. Contributing to the common good by loving our neighbors. And this is going to be one that I have a feeling will continue to evolve, but it's something that we need to get better at because for a long time we've sort of been scattershot. Something comes up and so then we're going to give to the earthquake in Nepal. Something comes up and so then we're going to do something for the wildfires in California. And not that we shouldn't do those things, but like we said, we can't do everything. And if we're just going to continue dissipating our energy and our resources into anything that sort of piques our interest, it's like a cat with keys, right? If it's jingly and shiny, we get sort of distracted by it. And the question is, how can we focus our efforts on doing a few things that will actually make a substantial difference in our neighborhood, in the community around us? And we have some ideas, but we're not going to present all that stuff tonight. So coming back to the pledge drive, if you'd like clarity on what it is you're investing in over this next season, if you wonder what will be made possible by the dollars that you give to make this thing go, to make it vital and alive, not just for us, but so that we can give it away, that's it. These are the things we're going to focus on. I'm not going to give you time now because we're going to get wrapped up, but as you go, I want you to carry these questions with you and bring these back next week because this is how we'll open the conversation next week. How do you see those priorities aligning with our assets? So we've presented several times. This is who Collective is at our best. How do we see those priorities coming out of who we are at our best? And then which priority are you most drawn to and why? And that's going to be where we kind of start out next week. Sure, I can also send it to you. Yeah, there'll be a blog post that reveals all the stuff that we've shared tonight. Good question. I don't know who's going to do that. Maybe we might post it online. There's a video, you can watch it on the video. That'll be somewhere on YouTube. Yes, right, exactly. Hey, Ben, do you want to do something else? Sure, yeah. Why not? Yeah. No, we will do that, and we will also have the giving updates come out as blog posts as well, somehow. I think ultimately, all these questions, I think the big question, who are we? What are we doing? Not just as a congregation, but as you sit there and wrestle with that in your own life. Hopefully that's cripplingly uncomfortable, as it has been for me for a couple weeks. But I think ultimately it should draw us back to this table. And I hope that what we continue to see as we figure out how it is that we embody this vision is that ultimately it's the vision of a Eucharistic community. That it's liturgical, that it's focused on who we are internally, our inner life together, but that it's also always focused on the community in which we find ourselves, that we look out to our neighbor. We liturgically, it's interesting, I had never thought of this. I thought of this week, and it was very moving to me. We liturgically set this table, right? I stand up here and say magic words and break bread, but we set the table. We have to set the table every week. I can't set it alone because you all are the ones that make it open, and you all are the ones that keep it open. Internally, we come with one another and for one another to receive the nourishment of community, hospitality, vulnerability, grace, the real presence in one another of the cosmic Christ that is in all things, the web of light that by love holds all things together and draws them all together as one. Bread for our journey. And nourishment for our souls. And as we look out to our neighborhood, to our parish, we're reminded each week to take the Eucharist, to take the good gift, the many graces, the gifts of all those assets that we listed, that we've seen in one another, that we've seen alive in this congregation, and we give our very lives away to a world in need of love and grace, a world in need of an open table, a world in need of authentic hospitality, and a world in need of a vision for a better world and a more humane way of being human. May we receive this good gift, the light which has illuminated our vision, and the table which has called us to embody it. A simple, disciplined, focused life together to pursue these few things that are ours to do. And following in the life-giving way of Jesus, may we give the world not only our sacred yes in alignment with this vision, but may we give the world the gift of our divine no, because we know what we've said yes to. This is the table that's set for us tonight. As always, it is open to us, but more importantly, it is open to all people, and no one will ever be turned away. When you're ready, feel free to come and grab a piece of bread and dip it in the cup.